I'm Anna Mulhollem. I'm thriving in a life of recovery from serious and persistent mental illness. I'm a certified peer support specialist, and I'm the Transitions to Community Living In-Reach Program Supervisor at Alliance Behavioral Health Care. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about how I came to each of these distinctions. At a young age, I struggled with excessive worry and obsessive thinking. I'm sure it was hard for those who loved me. My home setting was an idyllic, small, and close-knit community. A large family that lived within walking or driving distance, and even family working at my school. The support was there, but my thoughts were directed elsewhere. My emotions were big and erratic. My struggle with growing symptoms of mental illness was what I knew as how to define life. However, on the outside, I looked as if I was thriving. By the time I was in high school, I had won awards as a talented musician. I had won 2 pageants. I was in leadership positions in clubs at school, and I was even co-editor of the yearbook. I was chosen as an outstanding senior, and I even walked on as first seed of the tennis team after picking up a tennis racket only 2 months before, and the list goes on and on. But on the inside, I struggled. A look closer showed a student who entered the school cafeteria only once during the 4 years of high school because of extreme anxiety. I hid in a classroom and pretended to study during the lunch break. I stood outside my first period classroom to keep away from the crowd gathered in front of the school in the mornings waiting for the first bell. I begged and cried for comfort from mounting anxiety and bouts with extreme sadness that left me behind my closed bedroom door. It was confusing. Such extremes took a toll. I still managed to make it to college. In fact, an all-women's liberal arts college. I was thrilled, but those big emotions exploded. I feared leaving my dorm room. My body reacted strongly to deadlines. My relationships became dependent, and I found my only time of reprieve in my college counseling center. Soon, I started to self-harm and became suicidal. I started being hospitalized on psychiatric units, including a stay in a state psychiatric hospital. I managed to pass my classes, but the focus of my education had become survival. My behaviors were extreme and considered abnormal. My fight to control my emotional roller coaster, as well as my extreme reactions to any sign of abandonment, were labeled as serious and persistent mental illness, or SPMI. I started taking medication, gaining weight, and began struggling with food and eating to excess to fill up what felt like empty space inside, to provide a cushion that protected my battered and bruised insides from what my mind saw as a threatening world. I continued to self-harm in other ways to feel something, to contain the emotions that were invisible and that seemed to have no bounds. I wanted a release, so I resorted to extremes, harming myself and creating scars that I had to explain away. The hospitalizations continued, and my studies were sometimes just a matter of finishing up incompletes left from having to leave class for treatment. I had teachers who cared enough about me and thought enough about the importance of a quality education to help me see creative ways to communicate. Luckily, we had email starting my sophomore year of college. I learned writing was a way for me to communicate what I learned to those teaching me. And I learned how to negotiate a more controlled audience for memory lines or options to speak up in class voluntarily and on my terms instead of being called on at random. As long as I participated and did the work, I was learning and earning my degree. I graduated with a BA in English from Meredith College. I'm very proud of this accomplishment despite my challenges. During my college summers, I also did service work. I worked at a camp located on the North Carolina coast. I found enough comfort in the purpose of helping others and strength through a belief in a power greater than myself that I made my way up to a key leadership position on staff. Again, I have lived a life of extremes. My thoughts told me I was worthless and constantly in danger and in need of comfort and protection. My emotions agreed. My body reflected all of this, but my drive still led me to one of 5 college students, leading a team of 80 staff through 10 weeks of service work for about 1,000 campers per week. I worked at this camp for 4 consecutive summers. My 4th year of college, my last summer at camp, I finally crumbled completely and became a full-time mental illness patient and sufferer. I was no longer surviving, I was dying. I started spending most days in my car sitting in parking lots. I just sat, smoked cigarettes, and ate food I could get at a drive-thru or pick up wherever I bought my next pack of cigarettes. My weight increased drastically. I found comfort wherever I could. My focus and guide, my values, were no longer available. They were clouded and had been overridden by the urgency of needing protection and escape from myself. I found jobs that lasted short intervals. I always was relieved to be fired. I patched together housing here and there. I could afford rent for a few years, piecing together jobs and money given to me by family. I stayed independent for a while until I had to move back in with my parents or face homelessness. This pattern continued for about 10 years. I'm lucky to have parents who had the willingness and resources to support an adult child. I am lucky to have love from family and friends who knew the combative, emotionally agitated, and confused and hurting person was suffering from an illness, and what she was presenting them was not her real self. I'm sure they saw me with the concern and heartbreak that I now experience when seeing individuals I work with in TCL fight daily with the symptoms of mental illness that rob them of their true selves. I still knew my provider insisted that work and having my own home were recovery tools, but I was spent, I was paralyzed. I then began to believe that this was my life. This was what my life would now be like. I began to settle. I walked into the world of disability benefits and supervised living. I lost hope of independence. I bought into needing, into requiring a level of complete managed care of my life. I bought into not having options or choices or freedom, of being a burden and of needing supervision. That was the only choice I saw. I had reached the end of my individuality and allowed myself to be stamped with the label of helpless. Very soon, in short order, I grew to hate being managed. I hated the program I was a part of and the facility where I lived. I used some very unskillful behavior to get myself kicked out. I felt like I had frustrated everyone and believed that being a difficult person now defined me. I believed that I was and would always be all alone. So I decided to take the only step that seemed reasonable, and I overdosed. I spent 2 weeks in and out of consciousness in a hospital. I was hallucinating, I could not speak, and I took a turn for the worse. I have vague memories of my parents, friends, and even my psychiatrist coming in to see me, most likely for the last time. But I guess my higher power, my resilient body, and some kind of bit of hope in me was not done, because one day I woke up. I started getting better. Nurses came in and were excited to see me alive. My feeding tube was removed. Physical therapy started to help me get strong enough to walk, and I was released to begin my recovery. My psychiatrist said that dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, was the best treatment. I had been introduced to the therapy in college, so I trusted her judgment. I started skills training classes, and I began to search for a DBT therapist. I had 2 goals in mind: getting a job and living independently. It was difficult to sit in skills class, especially as I was approaching 400 pounds and anxious around people. But I was finding community, so I kept showing up. One of the leaders of my group was a woman whose determination and drive to help people learn to help themselves scared the daylights out of me. So I asked her to be my therapist. Dr. Christy Webb, psychologist and DBT therapist, believed in me, and I knew it. I still do. Her boundaries proved that she could handle my big emotions that I could barely contain. Her teaching was clear, and her therapy was true and kind. Her approach was and still is driven, compassionate, clear, and firm. She accepts me as I am, as well as helps me to make changes so that I can have a life worth living. I stand before you today, thriving in life, in great part to such a value-driven, disciplined, and compassionate provider. Christy saw someone I'd forgotten was there, and she told me about that person until I reacquainted myself with her and started acting like myself enough to awaken the person that was lying underneath all that pain. Christy recognized SPMI symptoms that are just going to hang around, but she helped me learn how to live with them, manage them, recognize them, and accept them. She let me know that she did not see me as a person needing disability benefits, nor a person needing the level of care I'd resigned myself to. She let me know that she saw before her someone who could live a full and independent life. She introduced me to the idea and concept of recovery. She said it over and over again until I could envision it, own it, and live it. I started slowly with supported employment. In fact, I spent some time working in a sheltered workshop because before IPS supported employment, this was the way to be assessed for vocational rehabilitation, VR, and to get a job coach. VR ended up paying for me to become certified as a peer support specialist because I started to find hope. I had a story to share, and I felt like sharing that story with others dealing with mental illness would be beneficial for them and me. I was then hired by the very agency where I had worked for the VR assessment. I was a part-time peer support specialist in a PSR. I was able to keep my disability benefits, and I was able to hold down a job helping others. I felt like I had won the lottery. With this know-how, I moved to the position of employment peer mentor on my agency's first IPS supported employment team. After working in this position for a while, I wrote my boss to ask to be full-time and have my hourly wage increased. I explained why I felt like I deserved these things, and I explained that I was ready to make the choice to let go of disability benefits. I received the full-time status, the raise, and I received a letter in the mail from Social Security that I no longer qualified for disability. Social Security continued with the SSDI overpayments each month, and knowing that Social Security would eventually send a bill for those overpayments, I opened a savings account and started moving the monthly SSDI payments into that account. I still struggled with mental illness. I also continued to struggle physically, so I finally quit smoking and I started really focusing on how to be physically healthy in order to help my mental state. I also started wanting more as far as work. I wanted to help even more people in recovery, and my interest in mental health had me studying what mental illness was like for others, not just those in my circumstances. I also wanted enough income in order to move out on my own. So I started 2 new things. I started researching weight loss surgery because my weight was extreme enough to warrant that life-saving measure. And I started searching for a new job because my desire to grow and my passion for helping others warranted expanding my career. These 2 recovery tools blossomed at the same time. I worked for 6 months, losing 40 pounds on my surgeon's prescribed diet, along with applying and interviewing at Alliance Behavioral Healthcare to become a Transitions to Community Living TCL InReach specialist. In the same week, I had a surgery date and a job offer. An agreement was made for me to start work after my recovery from surgery. I was thrilled and terrified. I made it through a 2-week liquid diet and I had my surgery. I went back to my parents' home to recover. I cannot begin to describe the change to my eating and disciplines around food that took place. But I had my recovery time, and I was soon well enough to start work. I went to work and got my very first cubicle and laptop, and was taught the ins and outs of TCL. Having at one time been eligible for TCL myself, I had a personal investment. Had TCL been an option for me, maybe my life would have not had to take an almost fatal turn. Maybe hope would have come sooner. Maybe I would have met an in-reach specialist in the facility where I was living. The work was emotional, purposeful, and passionate. I loved it, but I was starting to struggle physically. Started having extreme pain in my leg. Had to start using a cane, and soon it was unbearable to walk. My weight was dropping rapidly, and hormonal shifts caused a condition that had actually left me struggling to walk with what turned out to be a broken hip. I sat in the hospital and listened to my doctor talk about complete bed rest for at least 3 months, maybe more, no more weight loss because no exercise, home health care and physical therapy, and devastation began to set in. I called my supervisor at Alliance and told her the news. Because I had no idea how long the recovery would actually take, I made the decision to resign. I spent Christmas Eve in the hospital grieving the loss of my job. I was back to being managed, but I had enough hope to know that life could be different. I could work. I had purpose. I just had to endure hardship every once in a while. So I stayed in bed. My father carefully pushed me in a transport chair to the car once a week to drive me to see my therapist. Staying in bed would heal me physically, and making that therapy appointment each week would keep me alive. Some very supportive and loving friends kept me feeling supported and loved with calls and visits. Family brought gifts and helped out as well. My mom learned how I needed to eat after my surgery and prepare my meals. It was a long, hard, and painful process. I was in hell, but I did not want to die. Slowly I healed. I walked with a walker to build strength again, and I finally graduated from in-home care when I was released to drive. I had my last MRI shortly after that and was released to resume a regular life. I immediately called my former supervisor at Alliance in hopes that another job may open again at some point, and wanted to let her know that I valued my time there and was released to work and wanted to work on the TCL team again. She directed me to an open position I could apply for. I closed my eyes and I thanked God with tears streaming down my face and thought maybe, just maybe, I would get a second chance. I applied and interviewed for the open in-reach specialist position and got the job. I started work again. I also continued to lose weight. I was living a full life and holding the light of hope for others. Then, finally, I also had enough income to move back out on my own. I signed a lease and moved to my own apartment. From that day forward, I internalized what my work is about. Housing is a tool of recovery. With this space came my freedom. With this space came my refuge. With this space came a replacement for my car in remote parking lots. I had my spot in the community of my choice. I belonged and I was thriving. Housing had been the missing piece in my recovery. I firmly believed that had TCL been an option during those early years, my recovery would have moved much more quickly. I can honestly say that I did not begin to truly live and become a fully functioning member of society until I had a space to call my very own. At this point in my work, I started seeing signs of the leader that had surfaced in high school and my college summers. I wanted to help my team and the individuals we serve on a different level. About 6 months into my career at Alliance, I applied for the position of in-reach program coordinator and got the job. I began being a part of the larger picture, the larger discussions of how to impact the system on a different level. I was also losing weight and feeling better physically every day. I had lost around 150 pounds at this point. I had more energy. My therapist and I worked to manage my mental health symptoms as well as process the major changes that were happening in quick succession. Then, a few months later, a restructuring of the TCL team took place, and I became the InReach Program Supervisor. I now have the honor and privilege to supervise 9 individuals covering Wake, Durham, Cumberland, and Johnston counties, who go out into the community, as well as 3 state psychiatric hospitals, to carry the message of hope and recovery to those whom we serve. I have been given the opportunity to grow and develop my vocation and focus my purpose into the drive to operate on a different level. I take my position seriously and see my work as nothing less than marching forward on the path of a civil rights movement. I celebrated another milestone last summer. You would think it would be easy to be released from disability, right? Well, after trying for about 1.5 years, I finally contacted my congressman to help me communicate effectively with Social Security. I then received a bill for my overpayment of benefits, and I made arrangements to drop off the balance of the savings account I had created years ago. At 200 pounds lighter, healthy in mind and body, living in the community of my choice, and gainfully employed, I walked into my local Social Security office and handed over a cashier's check for $22,700 to officially end my disability status. Providers, I encourage you to pass along this particular information to those whom you serve. Individuals often do not know to save those overpayments. If I had not worked in this field and known that I would be receiving a bill, I could now be facing a very high price for my recovery. I am not broken. In fact, I never have been. It may have seemed for a long time to myself and others that I needed to be fixed. But what was happening was illness, mental illness. I needed fair, kind, and effective treatment. I also needed for someone to believe in me until I could believe in myself. I stand before you, a person with 3 qualifying serious and persistent mental illness diagnoses for TCL, who has lived the life and almost fallen to a higher than necessary level of management dictated by my resigned belief of my level of need. But I got a second chance. I was lucky to have a provider ignite, encourage, and feed that spark of hope. And now I carry that flame fueled by my very own experience to those whom we serve. I am proud and honored to now be in a position where I can share my story in hopes of helping someone else along the path of recovery. Thank you.